Hello, and welcome to Motel, the podcast where I bring you the true and fictional stories of crime. In this first podcast, I will be talking about the infamous story of the fictional murderer Norman Bates, and joining me is my guest and fiancé, Eddie.
Yo, what's up? It's your boy, Ed Bedhead.
This podcast will be my motel of crime stories, where unlike Norman Bates, I will be revealing the secrets of these murderers and other criminals. Throughout this podcast, I intend on going through fictional characters such as Norman Bates and John Kramer, also known as Jigsaw from the Saw franchise. I'll also be going through true crime such as the cases of Jeffrey Dahmer and Junko Furuta, so stay tuned for those and more. Also, I need to give a spoiler warning for the novels and films mentioned in this episode.
Spoilers!
So let's begin with the story of Norman Bates. In the first motel room right beside the motel office, Mary Crane showers in the tiny bathroom after a long drive. She didn't know it would be her last shower when a figure quietly entered the bathroom, casting the shadow of a woman holding a large knife on the shower curtain. The curtain flies open, and the knife begins plunging into Mary Crane. The room fills with screams of terror, and we are left to wonder, how did we get here? Let's start at the beginning.
The very beginning.
Norman Bates is the main character in the novel Psycho by Robert Bloch, written in 1959. He was then portrayed by Anthony Perkins in the 1969 film Psycho, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. There was also a 1998 film adaptation where Norman Bates was portrayed by Vince Vaughn. And finally, Norman Bates was portrayed by Freddie Highmore in the television series Bates Motel.
I heard that Vince Vaughn movie wasn't that good.
Yeah, I tried to watch it, but it was basically just like the original movie with different actors in a modern setting.
So wouldn't that make it good then? Because people today would like to watch
Maybe people today, but since I've seen the first one, I didn't like
so
it.
True fans are like,
yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Like if you've never seen the first one, maybe you would have liked it.
Okay.
When Bloch had begun writing Psycho, he later became aware of Ed Gein and was struck by, quote, how closely the imaginary character I'd created resembled the real Ed Gein, both in overt act and apparent motivation, end quote. For those that may not know, Ed Gein was a convicted murderer and body snatcher. He would exhume bodies from cemeteries and make keepsakes out of the bones and skin. He also confessed to killing 2 women. I'm not going to go into too much detail because this episode is about Norman Bates after all, but perhaps I'll cover Gein's full story in a later episode.
Also, disclaimer, that's different Ed, not me. Ed Bedhead. It's different.
There's a lot of famous Ed killers.
Oh my gosh.
Like Ed Kemper.
Who's that? I guess you'll talk about it in a different podcast.
Yeah, he'll probably come later. So back to Norman. Norman is a young bachelor who is dominated by his mother, whose name is Norma. She practically forbids him...
Her name's Norma?
Yeah.
His name's Norman?
And his father was also named Norman.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I guess that makes it easy to remember everyone.
Yeah, in the first episode of Bates Motel, the sheriff makes a comment about that, and all Norma can say is, can't he have the same name as his father?
But why does his mother have the same name?
I don't know. So Norma practically forbids Norman to have a life outside of her. When Norman was young, his mother made it very clear to tell him that having sexual intercourse is a sin and that all women are whores, except for her, of course. In the novel, it is also alluded to that the mother and son may have had a incestuous relationship.
Some Oedipus stuff.
Yeah.
Is that how you say it? Oedipus?
I don't know.
The story, you know, the Greek one? Where,
Oedipus?
Oedipus, yeah. The son marries the mother.
Mm-hmm. So now we get into the story. While there are many adaptations of Norman's story, I'm going to begin by just comparing the 1959 novel and the 1969 film adaptation. Afterwards, I'll go over the television series, Bates Motel. So Norma and Norman run a small motel together, where Norman is the caretaker. The state relocated the highway, which caused business to go down. Norma and Norman are in the middle of a heated argument when Mary Crane arrives at the hotel.
So this is like, Cars, when Sally's hotel isn't getting business because of the highway.
I guess in a kid-friendly way. Mary Crane is on the run after stealing $40,000 from a client at the real estate agency that she works at. She was planning to use this money to pay off her boyfriend, Sam Loomis's debt, and allow them to get married. Mary pulls over and sleeps on the side of the road on her way to Sam's home in California. A patrol officer awakens her, and he is suspicious of her, so he follows her after letting her drive on. She stops at a dealership and trades her car out. The police officer sees this, but he does nothing. She continues on in the new car and accidentally arrives at the Bates Motel and decides to take Norman's offer to stay because she is so exhausted.
Is the officer still following her at this point?
No, he's left her at the dealership.
He
just saw her get the new car and was like, oh well.
Okay, so he was following her this whole time. He's like, oh, she's just buying a new car? That's perfectly fine.
So Norman invites Mary for dinner and she accepts, but Norma is sent into a jealous rage, screaming, "I'll kill the bitch!" And Mary hears this being yelled out. They have dinner together regardless, and Mary tells Norman that Norma should be in a mental institution, but he simply tells her that nothing is wrong with his mother. Mary ends up saying goodnight and going to her room, where she then decides she's going to return the money the next day so she doesn't end up like Norman. She takes a shower and is scared by a woman-shaped figure holding a butcher knife. The figure beheads Mary. If you know this scene from the original movie, you will know it is one of the most iconic film scenes. In the movie scene, the woman is seen stabbing Mary in the shower repeatedly, and the iconic suspenseful music plays as she is screaming from pain and terror.
That's creepy.
However, in the novel, Mary was beheaded.
It's even worse.
Yeah. I don't know how the scene would have played out if they did it that way in the movie.
I think it might have been too gruesome for the times.
Maybe, but there was also criticism over this movie because they showed a toilet, which at the time they didn't show in movies.
Yeah, so I guess showing a beheading would have went way too far.
So Norman returns to the motel and he finds Mary's bloody corpse, immediately suspecting his mother of murdering her. In both the novel and the film, Norman puts Mary's body and belongings in the trunk of his car, and then he sinks the car in a swamp nearby. Mary's sister Lila tells Sam about Mary's disappearance and the theft that Mary committed. A private investigator is hired by Mary's boss to retrieve the money. The investigator discovers that Mary had stayed a night at the Bates Motel, so he proceeds to question Norman, who raises suspicion. He asks to speak with Norma as well, but Norman won't let him. The investigator calls Lila and Sam, letting them know what he had found out and that he would call back with an update. However, he is killed by the same mysterious figure that killed Mary. In the novel, the investigator was killed with a razor, but in the film, he was stabbed to death.
Well, so the officer was killed?
The private investigator.
Oh, that's still not good. He's gonna get a whole police force on him.
Sam and Lila decide to go to the Bates Motel themselves after they don't hear back from the investigator. In the novel, they meet up with the town sheriff, who tells them that Norma Bates had actually been dead for several years after committing suicide by poisoning herself and her lover. Norman had a nervous breakdown and was sent to a mental institution after this happened. In the film, Sam visits the motel on his own. He sees a figure in the house and he assumes it to be Norma. Norman is worried about more inquiries, so he carries his mother from her bedroom to the fruit cellar. Lila and Sam then get a hold of the sheriff, who tells them Norma had been dead for 10 years after a murder-suicide. The sheriff believes that the detective lied to Sam and Lila so he could take the money from Mary for himself. Sam and Lila do not believe this, so they head back to the motel.
Also, if you hear snoring noises, that's Kingsley the pug.
He's sleeping under our feet. Sam distracts Norman in the motel's office while Lila sneaks into the house. Norman senses something is happening, so he knocks Sam unconscious.
Okay.
Norman heads into the house, and Lila hides in the cellar, where she sees Norma's mummified corpse. Lila screams, and Norman enters the cellar dressed in his mother's clothes and a wig. He attempts to stab Lila, but Sam appears and overpowers him.
Oh, wow.
In the film, while they're at the police station, a psychiatrist explains that Norman murdered his mother and her lover 10 years earlier in a fit of jealousy.
Oh, so it wasn't suicide.
Mm-hmm. He could not stand to be separated from his mother, so he kept her corpse and treated it as if she were still alive.
Yeah, that's gross.
His mother became an alternate personality in Norman's mind. Norma would be just as jealous and possessive in Norman's mind as she was when she was alive. In the state of being his mother, he had already killed 2 women before Mary and the private investigator. Norman sits in jail while his mother's voice insists that the murders were all Norman's doing. And finally, Mary's car is seen being pulled out of the swamp.
So Norman pretends to be Norma?
Yeah.
So, like...
Because he couldn't stand her being dead, so he just created her in his mind.
So
he would be her, at some points.
Oh, so he would be the one yelling
Mm-hmm.
in the house as if he's having a conversation with somebody.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
However, in the novel, the county highway crew uncovers the cars from the swamp and find Mary and the investigators' bodies. Sam speaks to a psychiatrist at the police station, and he learns that Norman and his mother lived alone together after his father left them when Norman was young. Norman became fascinated with the occult, spiritualism, and Satanism.
As one does.
He was also a secret transvestite impersonating his mother. When his mother met Joe Considine, Norman's jealousy took over and he poisoned them both. He forged a suicide note from his mother. Norman is declared psychotic and put into a mental institution for life. A few days later, his mother's personality completely takes over Norman's mind. His mother reveals that she had to take over because Norman's personality was the murderous psychotic one.
I'm giving this motel 3 out of 5 stars. The service was good. Well, the food was good, but the service was terrible. They tried to murder me in my sleep. That'd be my Yelp review.
The only food that Mary ate before she was killed was a sandwich that Norman made.
Oh, wow. So it gets 0 stars.
Now for the television series. Bates Motel started in 2013 and went on for 5 seasons, ending in 2017. Norman is played by Freddie Highmore, and Norma is played by Vera Farmiga. You might know her from the Conjuring movies.
Oh.
The original film and book take place in White Pine Bay, Oregon, while the show takes place in Fairvale, California, in a modern setting. In the novel, Norman's father abandoned his family, but in the TV series, the show begins with the death of his father. Norma then purchases the Seafarer Motel so that she can start a new life with her son.
Did they say how the father died? He just died.
From what I remember from watching it, he was, dead in the kitchen and Norman found him, but I don't remember exactly how.
Maybe like a heart attack or something.
So a few days after they had moved in, Keith Summers arrives at the hotel, and he is mad at Norman and Norma for buying the motel because it used to be his family's property before he lost it to the bank, and he doesn't see them as fit enough to run the motel.
Oh, it's not his problem now.
Norma threatens him and makes him leave what is now her property. Later in the night, Norman goes out to a party while his mother is home alone. Summers breaks into the home and R-words Norma in her kitchen. Norman walks into this, and he knocks Summers unconscious momentarily. Summers wakes up, and Norma stabs him to death. Norman tried calling the police, but Norma won't let him. Instead, they carry the body to one of the empty motel rooms and put him in the bathtub.
Well, I think they would have understood it was self-defense.
That's what Norman said, but Norma didn't want to make it a big thing because then everyone would know that someone died at their motel and they wouldn't have business. Yeah, because they hadn't opened yet. They began cleaning up the blood from the kitchen in their house, and they tear up the carpets in the motel room. The sheriff arrives at the motel and notices Summers' car parked in front of the motel. He becomes suspicious of a cut on Norma's hand and the fact that Norman and Norma are tearing up carpet at 2 a.m. He looks around the motel room and uses the bathroom, which is unnerving for Norman and Norma because they just put Summers' body in the bathroom.
Oof.
The sheriff comes out and eventually leaves. So, I don't exactly know why the sheriff showed up, but from what he said, I guess he saw the lights on. He said that he didn't know the motel was open already, so he was just going to check it out.
It's like, what kind of quality is it in?
The next day, they put the body in the trunk of their car. They then take a rowboat out on a small lake to dump the body. And that is Norman and Norma's first murder at the Bates Motel. Their first murder is very different from the original story. First of all, Norma is still alive and actually helps commit the murder, unlike in the original story, where all the killings were simply just Norman with his mother's personality. Throughout the rest of the first season, Norman and Norma work to keep the sheriff from finding out what happened to Keith Summers. There are a total of 5 seasons, so although I could go through them all, that would make this podcast take all day.
Did any more murders happen in the first season?
Someone did die either at the end of the season or the very beginning of the second season, but I don't remember how she died.
Okay.
It was a big deal, though, because it was Norman's teacher.
Oh. That's not good.
I highly recommend watching Bates Motel if you have not seen it. I believe it is a great adaptation of the awkward and creepy character of Norman Bates. Freddie Highmore portrays him as a modern teenager, which, as strange as it may sound, makes it easier for me to feel a connection towards him. He's a troubled teenager, he's shy, and he's awkward in school. From the outside, he looks nothing more than a regular teenage boy. Of course, he is still a murderer, so his actions should not be excused, but I believe some of his personality traits and the influence of his mother are what turned him into the killer he became. So that is the story of Norman Bates. There are sequels to the films and books, but this is just a look at the beginning of this crazy character. I had actually seen the show Bates Motel before seeing Psycho, but after watching both, I prefer the movie. In my opinion, the movie being in black and white adds to the eeriness. And of course, the iconic shower scene cannot be forgotten. It is honestly one of my favorite scenes in film history. Did you know that the blood they used in the scene was actually chocolate syrup?
Oh, guess you can't tell, huh?
Because it's black and white.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen the original film, I highly recommend it. Norman Bates is an interesting and eerie character that is hard to not be intrigued by. I can assume that he suffers from some sort of trauma due to his mother's clinginess and the loss of his father. Norma is Norman's whole world. She has him believing that there is nothing without her. I think if his mother would have let him have a life outside of her, he may not have turned into the psycho he turned into. If he had not grown up so attached to his mother, maybe he would have been happy for her to be in a relationship after his father, rather than reacting in extreme jealousy, resulting in the death of both his mother and her lover. Norma's personality claims that Norman is the crazy one, but I believe that he is only crazy because of his mother.
Yeah, makes sense.
Norma was possessive and cruel, which was only passed down to Norman. He becomes a very jealous person because of her. What do you think? Do you think that if his mother had raised him differently, he could have avoided becoming this horrible person?
Maybe.
Well, that's all for today's episode on the infamous fictional character Norman Bates. Stay tuned for the next episode where I discuss a serial killer that actually once lived among us. Leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and comment down below who you think the next episode will be about. Thank you for checking in to May's Motel, and I hope you'll visit again soon.